There's a story unfolding on the Canadian prairies of a quiet revolution that suddenly isn't so quiet. Good, hard-working farmers are breaking the law, or at least that's what the Canadian Wheat Board says. One man is in jail. There may be others to follow. There's a battle being waged in courtrooms across the Canadian plains. Many people ask what's driving these people to such extremes.
What we're trying to do is end the monopoly of our Canadian Wheat Board. We're sick and fed up with the monopoly they've had over the farmers, and especially Western Canada, for 50 years.
Stop putting us in jail, stop seizing our trucks, let our trucks go, because we're doing nothing wrong with trying to market our own product. That's all we want to do.
A growing number of farmers are beginning to doubt the Wheat Board's ability to extract the highest premiums for their grain. So they're organizing under the banner of Farmers for Justice and fighting for the right to market their own grain.
Dealing with the United States, our friends, our neighbors, and we're put in jail. Where's the honesty? I think we should have the choice to market to the Wheat Board if we so choose.
We want the freedom. We've got a free trade agreement. We just want to exercise in it. It's just an exercise in freedom. This 49th parallel is nothing more than an imaginary line. We've got the same interests as the Americans. We've got a product to sell if they want it, and vice versa.
Canadian farmers like Andy McMecken and Dave Sawatsky demonstrate a magic auger located at the Canada-US border.
That grain's worth $3 a bushel. That grain's worth $8 a bushel.
There's a series of events that will continue to keep the pressure on the government saying, hey, I mean, you are discriminating against the farmers. The farmers do not have the right to sell their grain at this point in time, apparently, where they want to, which is a violation under the Charter. And the farmers need the right, they want the rights, and that is where things are at.
Andy McMecken and Dave Sawatsky believed they weren't breaking any laws when they started selling their grain across the border into the U.S.
Well, carry on, Phil. I'll see you in court. I don't want to see you right now. Get those bylaws out of the way right now.
We don't want those kind of people around here monkeying with our business. Simple as that. Stay the hell out of our way. It's simple. The RCMP, they know enough to stay back. We've got a mission to run here and we're going to do it. Simple as that.
Did you have the desired effect today?
Sure. Worked good. I couldn't imagine it being so smooth.
That grain was hauled across, there was no law. And when Andy took the barley down, this last deal, when he drove through the customs, he did not break a law, because Mr. Goodale had not rewrote that law that day. When he came back, he had absolutely nothing in that tractor. He was smuggling nothing. They came out and harassed him at the border and told him his tractor was seized. He'd done absolutely nothing wrong.
He has the courage to stand up for what he believes is right, and he's standing up for freedom. He's prepared to defy an unjust government monopoly, a law that says the government has the right to do something but the people don't.
Have you ever been in a jail before?
Not this long. I'm just overnight over this same issue. I've never been convicted of running a stop sign. Just the system has convicted me of something. They have to, just to cover up themselves, their illegalities, and corruption in general. They can only do it so long. But I haven't done anything wrong. I haven't broken any laws. And if it's not illegal, I know it's not illegal. The law states clearly that I don't have to provide an export license to customs when I export grain. So if that's not illegal, then customs has no right to seize my tractor. So nothing else, none of these other charges exist. It's all created from one charge.
How long do you expect to be in for?
Not more than 2 years old. They decide to start backing their way out of this mess that the system has got themselves into, then I'm ready and waiting. But not backing out before they're ready to admit guilt.
The Farmers for Justice are kind of a radical fringe that is prepared to do dramatic things and even get criminal records to make their point. And just because you don't agree with the Wheat Board or don't agree with this system of marketing doesn't put you in that camp.
I don't worry too much about the Farmers for Justice because I view them as a fringe group. They're sort of like those freemen in Montana.
You know, if they compare us to the freemen, I guess I would compare him to, and the Canadian Wheat Board to someone like Adolf Hitler, total dictatorship. And neither one of them are, you know, justify the label.
If they can convince their neighbors and their other farmers that in fact the Wheat Board adds no value and it's only a hassle and it's exploiting them somehow, I guess the Wheat Board will disappear. But most farmers don't see the Wheat Board that way. They see the Wheat Board as a farmers marketing cooperative, which gives them some market power in the international market, dominated by some very, very big players.
The industry is very complex. And yet it's intuitive at the same time. The concept is simple, you know, farmers banding together and using the collective power in order to have more power in a very cutthroat international marketplace.
They say that the pooling system ensures all will benefit from the marketing expertise of the board's top agents.
I can tell you that this organization has been able to acquire people that are real Wayne Gretzky's of the grain industry to work on behalf and market on behalf of Western Canadian producers. And we just don't have one or two of them. We've got a number of them. We could put a whole team together and we'd be willing to take on the grain marketing team of any organization in the world.
Equality for farmers. That is the founding principle on which the Wheat Board was created. You have 120,000 Western Canadian farmers, all living at different distances from port. If they were to compete against one another, it would just be a cutthroat mayhem.
In my judgment, the Canadian Wheat Board was not born, it did not have a legitimate birth. It was a breached birth, as it were. It was, as you know, implemented in a time of war. At the time of its implementation, it was submitted to by prairie farmers largely as a result of patriotism and the emergency and pressures of wartime. In many cases, their neighbors or relatives, in a lot of cases, were going off to war. They were dodging bullets. They were being sunk in the Atlantic. And the federal government comes along and says that as a measure of war, we have to nationalize the grain industry. So the resistance on the prairies to that kind of intrusion on the part of government was not resisted at all. It was embraced by many as a matter of patriotism. And even though farmers knew they were taking less money for their grain at that time, they went along with it. And then after the war, the Canadian government used the instrument of the Canadian Wheat Board to provide Britain with large quantities of wheat at very low prices. And again, there were many farmers who viewed it as an act of patriotism.
When I joined the service, I went freely. I wore Canada on my shoulder, and I wear it proudly. And I fought for freedom. And when I come back, only to find that that freedom had been taken away while I was away. And now, it's 50 years later or more, and that is still taken away. It was a War Measures Act that put that in there, and now that War Measures Act is still in place, and that never was taken off, and I think that freedom I lost.
We have to recognize that a monopoly system of marketing like the Canadian Wheat Board there's a price to be paid. And in the case of the Canadian Wheat Board, vis-a-vis the Canadian farmer, the price that is paid is you lose some independence. For some people, that is a very high price. For others, that is a price they're very, very willing to pay in order to enhance their financial position.
The legislation that we have says we are the sole marketer for Canadian-grown, Western Canadian-grown wheat and barley. So all wheat that is grown on the prairies that is of milling quality, if farmers want the highest price for it, I mean, they could choose to sell it into the feed market if they wanted to. But if they want to sell it, it has to go through the Canadian Wheat Board. We're the marketing arm for the farmers in that sense.
There's a popular belief, I think, amongst some that the Canadian Wheat Board is a farmer marketing agency. The truth, it is not. It is a government marketing agency. It doesn't have farmers on its board of directors. Farmers don't gain access to the information that's there under any circumstances, and farmers are not involved farmers do not participate in the process that defines the boundaries or the barriers of how the Canadian Wheat Board operates.
Why should a farmer not be allowed to export any grain on his own when he can export his cattle, he can export his oil, he can export his fertilizer, and he can export almost anything that a farmer uses for input is free to go back and forth across the 49th parallel, but not wheat, because we got some politicians and bureaucrats that stop it.
In 1935, it started as a monopoly for farmers. In 1943, it became a monopoly over farmers. Hell of a difference. For farmers or over farmers. That's what happened. And they never took it off. They never took that monopoly off because they found out it worked really good. They could literally do anything they want to the farmer and you can't do a damn thing about it.
That's the biggest trouble with these guys is that they're insulated in an office and they have no outside, no contact with the real world, with what really goes on. They're just, they have so much power and yet they have no intelligence and not intelligence, they have no common sense. They have no feel for the common people, what goes on in the real world.
How are you guys surviving?
It's been tough.
Some days we wonder.
We're not all rich, I'll tell you that. We owe a hell of a lot of money. Some of us do anyway.
But like, that's not the point though, whether you're rich or whether you're poor, whether you make money now when grain prices are good, it's the fact that you are knuckled under. You have, everyone else in this country has the freedom to sell what they produce without any problems to anyone they want. I cannot technically sell you wheat off my farm. Okay? I can't sell wheat to him, I can't sell wheat to a miller, I can't sell wheat to anyone. Once wheat is grown, it is not mine anymore. I have no control over what happens with it.
So you think that a small group of farmers are going to be able to bring down the Canadian Wheat Board?
They just got to learn to cooperate with us, that's all. Cooperate with the farmers. They don't need to bring the wheat board down. Nobody in the Farmers for Justice at any time ever said they want to bring the wheat board down.
Everything that happens in this town is the result of dollars that have been generated out of the dirt by farmers, and the more that farmers can get for their product and look after themselves to create a better lifestyle for them and their families is going to be a benefit to any small town along this U.S. border all across Western Canada.
Well, isn't it just a little odd that you can go just a few miles south of the border here and get $2 a bushel more? Right. You know, and how far are we from the border? That's how the wheat board keeps everybody, it makes everybody equal. Everybody gets half as much as what they should. It's ridiculous to think that just because they have, quote, they use this single desk. Well, I read somewhere, who was minding the single desk when they were selling barley for $120 a ton? And it was worth $250. Who was at the controls then? Nobody knows, because they're not accountable. You can't phone that guy up and say, hey, listen, you know, you screwed up on the selling the barley, because nobody admits to even being there. They were all on holidays when that took place.
If farmers tell you we don't release information and you can't get information from the wheat board, that is absolutely incorrect. We are a public body and we have an audited financial statement and it's available to anybody who wants to come and get it. If they're asking for individual sales, the answer is no, and nobody will give that to you. None of our competitors will give it to you because it's got commercial sensitivity. The other fact is if we were to release that kind of information, even if we were inclined to, very quickly we wouldn't have too many buyers wanting to deal with us because they don't want their business revealed publicly to their competitors.
big companies and corporations don't divulge all their information either. But the critical distinction there is that we simply don't have to deal with big companies if we don't want to. They come to us, they either offer us the best deal, or they provide us with services, or we don't deal with them. You don't deal with Walmart, it's a big American company, you don't deal with them if you don't want to. I don't have to deal with Cargill if I don't want to, but I do have to deal with the Canadian Wheat Board. I have no choice in the matter.
You know, if the federal government started throwing other Canadians in prison for marketing steel pipe, or marketing coffee tables, or telephones, or any other commodities, including whiskey, you know, I'm sure that the federal government would encourage the distillers in Canada to market as much whiskey in the United States or anywhere else as they can. But yet to throw people in prison for marketing barley it's outrageous.
The Wheat Board totally controls the biggest raw resource we have in Western Canada, and that's our grain. And the amount of processing that takes place in Wheat Board controlled grain is virtually nil in Western Canada. To have processing plants here would create jobs and economic development. It would provide customers for farms, big and small farms in Western Canada. Right now we only process 2 to 3% of the wheat. Before the Wheat Board took over, 20% was processed in Western Canada. We're processing 50% of our canola. Right over here is a big new oat plant you can see in the background. Can oat milling was built when oats was taken out from under the Wheat Board. We will see a lot more processing in Western Canada when the Wheat Board loses control, total control of that grain.
I think we've shown here in the last 4 or 5 years that it can be very successful to have a grain like oats on the cash market and be marketed very effectively. One of the things that's very different about our company and our business in oats versus some of the other agricultural commodities is that oats for us is primarily exported in the United States and South America and worldwide. And I think when you're dealing with a Canadian crop that and with your ultimate market being out of Canada, you've got to have a market that's open. The day that we get a contract with our customer, we need to be able to react and buy those oats right away to protect our hedge risk. We can't have a large bureaucratic organization like the Canadian Wheat Board controlling our business. We couldn't survive in that.
If you look at Durham, I think North Dakota has something like 13 pasta plants. Saskatchewan has none. You know, we fight with the U.S. over Durham exports. We export it down there. They process it, and we ship about 60% of that back as a finished product. The board says it's distribution problems that we would have distributing it because of our vast area here. Look at North Dakota. You know, if there's a mill a mile inside North Dakota, they have the same distribution problems that we have, and they seem to deal very, very well. The problem is that the mills can't go to the producer, contract a specific quantity and quality, and be assured of that, you know, be assured of the product at a guaranteed price. Like, it would be great for me to be able to contract, say, 1,000 acres of durum or spring wheat to a mill, guaranteed price, guaranteed delivery dates, and we'd both know what was going on. But that doesn't happen here, and it's not going to as long as the monopoly's here.
We've got tremendous success in the malting industry. We've got success in the ethanol business. We've got pasta plants working in Western Canada, servicing the markets. We've got flour mills and milling flour in Western Canada. There's all kinds of activity if you just take the time to examine the amount of value added that takes place in Western Canada. Now, that's on the human consumption side. On the other side of the coin, where the majority of the value added takes place, is in the manufacture of feeds, in the conversion of cereal grains to meat, through the poultry industry, the beef industry, and the hog industry. These have been tremendous success stories for Western Canada, and we're still growing.
I see a huge potential for Western Canada to have tax base. Our road systems are getting poorer and poorer, especially in Saskatchewan right now. We're moving a lot of grain by truck, but we're not getting a lot more. We're not getting our value-added dollars to our grain, and we're losing our children. They're moving out of the provinces. They're moving out of Saskatchewan, out of little town of Welland here. They're moving to Vancouver, and they're moving to Toronto for jobs. But we can keep them here. We can develop the industry and the value-added business. We'll have more feedlots pop up. We're going to have all kinds of business set up. And there's all kinds of entrepreneurs out there that will find things to do once they can get at it.
One of the biggest things right now is we don't have control on our marketing. We grow the crop, we do all the planning to put in the crop, and we're left with nothing at the end other than giving our grain to the wheat board for them to market. I choose to grow barley basically because it's feed and it's not under direct control of the wheat board in a domestic market. This stuff was sold actually back in January, so 6 months ago I had already sold this. I'm making about 30% more than the local elevators are paying right now, which is quite a significant amount. They feel that the monopoly the grain industry holds over me is the best for me, but I'm the one with my fingers in the dirt. We're shoveling grain out of a bin and signing my name to the bottom of mortgages and having to pay them back. We're not dependent on government subsidies anymore. The government's bailed out of subsidies and the crow rate, etc. But yet they continue to want to dominate our marketing. They want to continue to oversee the wheat board and the nature of the wheat board.
Well, a person's got to make a living, so they should be able to do whatever's best to make their living. I mean, that's what I got to do too. I got to go with whoever pays the best, and so I think they should have a choice.
If there's money to be made in marketing, it's part of my business as a whole to make every extra penny count towards my bottom line to be a viable operation. It's not unlike any other business.
Farmers have to do what they can. Get their crop off when it's time, when the weather's there for it. Otherwise, you can't combine when it's wet, and you can't make hay when it's wet.
We're kind of... We'll test this. If I bring this to the elevator and I don't agree with the grade that they're giving me, I can ask them to send it to the Grain Commission and they'll make a ruling on it one way or the other.
I was in farming back in those years when we didn't have no wheat board, and it was very hard moving our grain. In fact, the problem was the better off farmers were equipped with big trucks and that. Come year end, we couldn't get at the elevator. They'd be lined up there. We wouldn't get our quotas in. This way it's been fair to everybody, I think.
We ship our raw product out of the country to be processed into other foods in other countries because of the Canadian wheat board.
It's considered one red wheat, but there's several different levels of proteins, eh? So the higher the protein, the better quality flour, the more money they get. We had 385.8. That's gross tons. All right, see you tomorrow then.
We have 3 children that are really interested in farming as a career move when they're of age. And we're just trying our hardest to make it viable and work so that there's something there for them that's positive when it comes time in not even 20 years, I'd say 15 years. They could be out there doing the same stuff that we've been doing for the past 20.
Just about done harvesting.
What are you doing the stubbling?
The other day, and we ain't gonna make you haul meals no more. We got working about 6 o'clock this morning, and it isn't always easy going 20, 18, 16 hours a day. depending on the conditions. We have to get the crop off when it's ready to come off. If I go out of my way to grow a better crop, if I put more time into it, if I put more inputs into it, like more expenses, I'm still going to only net an average price to the marketing monopoly of the Canadian wheat board.
I certainly don't believe that one individual farmer on his farm in Ponoka, Alberta, or Priestville, Saskatchewan, or Plum Coulee, Manitoba, is going to outperform a team of professional grain marketers who are in the markets day in, day out, 24 hours a day.
The idea that somehow farmers are like little children and we have to set up a government entity to protect them from these big bad companies that are going to come around and exploit them is so absurd. We're responsible people. Some farmers are relatively well educated, and all farmers have got access to information from all over the world.
I think that there's an attitude of arrogance. There's an attitude definitely of elitism, and the idea that these people are specialists or they know more or are smarter or more intelligent than others. It would seem that they claim to have a monopoly on certain, not only on the actual marketing of grain, but there seems to be the attitude that there's a monopoly on certain types of knowledge or information, and the idea that a government agency that is completely unaccountable and completely without public exposure in its operations, that the reason that we should keep it that way is because it has, access to secret entrepreneurial knowledge that is not available to anyone outside of this secret government agency. That's an awful big pill to swallow, and personally I can't swallow it, and I think there's a growing number of people who can't swallow it either.
The concept of the board at the end of the day is very simple. Farmers believe that if they stick together and market as one and have a little bit of market power and sell a quality product, that over the long haul they're going to be better off. Yes, on any given day they might find a higher price in the U.S., but if you're going to wreck the whole cooperative approach to marketing by jumping queue when it's to your advantage, you won't have this system of marketing.
I don't think that each and every one of us here want to be driving through that border and hauling our grain down there every day for the rest of our lives, but we would certainly like to see that American price on the elevator in our local towns. And that $2 a bushel, while it does hit that premium, occasionally is a big, big $2. Farmers could pay off the national debt in this country if they'd allow them to.
The people who want to go down into the States and just pick the upmarket, the highest spot price there, are clearly people who haven't thought about their neighbors, certainly, but who haven't thought either that if there are many of them, if the border was open and there were many of us, then that high spot price would immediately decline, because then there'd be an oversupply, and in a supply-demand market, when you have a good supply, the price goes down.
Well, I think the grain up here will just equalize the price of grain, just like oats or rye. And
our price of grain will come up to be the same price as the U.S. grain is what will happen. It'll just come up to the same price, and there won't be any wheat going across the line anyway. It'll all be hauled to our local elevators, and they'll market accordingly on the world stage.
If 130,000 farmers in Western Canada did that, I mean, how long would it last? Let's be honest about this. It wouldn't last 2 minutes, simply because we would kill ourselves trying to underprice each other, if that were to be the case. And secondly, the U.S. reaction, as they've publicly stated, I mean, that border would be closed, just bang. Like, just closed. Because they have public pressures down there and political pressures down there.
We want to derive our prices from the free market system. At the same time, we cannot have the Canadian imports flood our market and depress our prices.
Grain elevators locally have been taking Canadian grain, and it's been difficult for us to market our product because they're either full or they don't have boxcars to ship our grain out, and we have financial commitments to meet.
Canadian farmers were taking grain down to elevators just a few miles from where they farm and across the line in North Dakota or Montana. The wheat board sent people down to those elevators and said, whatever you're paying for that grain, we'll sell it to you cheaper. in order to stop the flow of grain direct from farmers, the wheat board came in and dumped the grain. They're famous for doing that. They do it all over the world. They find out where the Americans are selling grain. They walk into Indonesia or Japan and say, look, we'll sell you all the grain you want for 50 cents under the market. There are reasons why our prices for our grain have been so much lower than what the American farmer gets. For 53 years they've been lower. And a lot of it has to do with the way a massive government entity in total control does business. It is like, literally like a dinosaur that stumbles around, dumping grain and hurting people.
Remember, the wheat board is selling there too. Your marketing agency is on every given day is trying to sell your grain into the markets that return the most money. So we're trying to put as much grain as we can into Japan and the UK and a few other selected markets, and the US. In fact, we put so much grain into the US that we ran into trade problems. In addition, you had farmers running across the border during that period, and they were plugging up elevators in North Dakota and Montana and Minnesota and exacerbating the problem. But at the end of the day, the whole issue was a destructive trade war, where the U.S. market was a high-priced market, an island of high prices in a world of low prices. Our farmers were getting low prices because our grain was going into the discounted markets, and our pool price was low compared to the U.S. And farmers looked at our price and says, low, it's higher in the U.S., I can do my own marketing, I'll load up my truck and head south.
If you farm in the designated area that some farmers have started referring to as the ghetto of Western Canada, you have to, before you can export your own grain or before you can sell it to an export customer, you have to first sell it to the Canadian Wheat Board's monopoly and then buy it back. Now what we have found increasingly is that because the Wheat Board's not subject to any kind of scrutiny, because it's under this total iron curtain of secrecy, you may have to pay some kind of ridiculous price. I have been quoted by the Wheat Board as high as $12 a bushel for my own grain. Meanwhile, they turn around and sell it to other companies, big companies, supporters of the Wheat Board and other export buyers like the Chinese and so on, for maybe $5, $6 a bushel.
The Canadian Wheat Board has tried to keep the farmers from exporting their own grain. I seen one farmer who had asked for an export permit on some of his winter wheat in April. They requested a buyback of $339 a ton, which is $9.23 a bushel. There has never been such a payment on 1CW high protein wheat as that. So what are they trying to do? They're trying to squash farmers exporting their own grain. They want the whole system to come through them, and they want to keep funneling off the funds for certain, what do you call it, services they give you or claim they give you.
They're putting us in jail because we're trying to get into the U.S. with our grain to get a world price. The U.S. market is totally these big transnationals, or whatever the buzzword is, big grain companies. Yet their price is, you know, up to $2 a bushel more than ours. And on the other hand, the Wheat Board says we don't want to become like them because we'll be swallowed up. Like it doesn't hold water. How can they keep us from getting to something that the price is higher, and yet they don't want us to become that because it'll lower the price? You know, it doesn't hold water.
You see, you can't easily get a permit from the Canadian Wheat Board to export. What you can't do is you can buy your grain back at the price which the Canadian Wheat Board could have gotten that day on the spot market in the States. What you can't do is take your grain and go into that market and undersell the board. You can't lower the price, which of course the rest of us who are pleased to have a higher price rather than a lower price aren't anxious to see individual mavericks go out and lower that price in the American market.
The Canadian Wheat Board Act only regulates the trade, the grain trade themselves. I'm not part of the trade. I'm an individual farmer growing a product, and if my desire is not to offer the grain to the Canadian Wheat Board, then they will never get my grain. there's no reason why they, if the Canadian Wheat Board's so good, why can't they get us more money? They tell us that the grain is a better quality. It's always so good, but when it comes to the money, we get 35% less than everybody else.
We feel right to this minute that we have not broken the law. And as soon as we can get back to moving grain, as soon as I have some harvested, it has to go to the U.S. because like this barley that Andy shipped and the barley that I've grown here and that he has, it's an unregistered variety. It's worth $2 here for $2.30 maybe for as feed barley. In the U.S. we have it contracted at $6 U.S. so we can't sell it here. It's a lower yielding variety, but it's got other very good qualities that the Wheat Board has absolutely no interest in. They told us they don't have a pool, they don't have any desire to sell it. So
what do they want you to do? Use it for feed?
They want us to sit here until they have Andy's farm and all my assets, and then go away and say nothing. We're not going to.
When Andy and Bill and Dave Sawatsky have been charged, they've never been charged under the Canadian Wheat Board Act, because they know that if they were to take the Canadian Wheat Board Act in a court, the court could never uphold extortion, and that's exactly what the Wheat Board Act is doing. It's extorting money from farmers. It's just like when I was in school. Big kids used to come and say, give me an apple and we'll protect you. And now we're giving all our apples to the Wheat Board and we're getting nothing in return. They're not protecting us, they're protecting themselves.
What's it been like for you and your family since Andy's been detained?
I can do this. It's been very difficult. It's been frustrating and degrading, and I travel 660 miles a week just to visit Andy for less than 3 hours. But we're persevering. I think it's actually been harder on Andy. He likes the wide open and the farm, and that's been difficult for him not to see the farm. And of course we all miss him terribly.
Have you been trying to bring the family harvest in?
Well, we've had lots of help, yeah. The neighbors have helped in every way possible with keeping the farm work going.
Farmers only do this out of the kindness of their hearts. They don't need a reason to help a neighbor, a farmer, one of their own. It just comes naturally because they know that someone else would do it for them.
Well, Andy McMicken's been a friend of mine all my life, and I believe in the cause that he's fighting for, so we came out to help him harvest today.
We're trying to help a farmer that's in jail, that's bucking the Wheat Board, and we're out here to try and help him get his crop off so that he'd be ready for winter, so he doesn't lose everything completely.
This is our business, this is our livelihood, is farming. And we can market our own grain if they just give us the opportunity. There's guys that do not want to market their own grain, but they're the people that want to go to the coffee shops and want to go curling every day and watch ball games and hockey games on TV at home. But not me. I want to be out there, and I want to be involved in marketing my own grain, because I know I can do a better job than the Canadian Wheat Board.
How do you keep going? You don't give it a thought. You have to keep going. You can't stop. The world doesn't stop and you can't stop. So, yeah, it would be great if Andy was here, but you just have to keep going.
We all empathize with the McMecken family, and we want to support them and make them feel that they're not alone. Farmers know how to cooperate. We cooperated to work together long before the Wheat Board was given its monopoly, and we will be able to do that, work together long after that monopoly is ended.
The strange part of it is they picked Andy as the #1 man, and I signed probably more export papers than Andy did. I think I understand is the reasoning for it is that the wheat board and the customs people felt that there were actually three major exporters. There's Ben Hootie, there's Andy McMicken, and there's Dave Sawatsky. And when they come after Andy, they found me involved too, so I wasn't one of the key people. They chose, they've tried all the way to keep me out of the thing, but I'm as guilty as Andy is, and Sawatsky or anyone else. Sawatsky is not guilty by his judge. Andy and myself are by another judge.
I think what happened in 1994, 3 and 4, is there were, as you mentioned, a number of farmers exporting their own grain outside the wheat board monopoly. They tried to block that in the fall of '94 with an order from the Minister of National Revenue that attempts to seize trucks and so on. Now, one of our applications that were taken in court is that the Minister of National Revenue, no minister can create penalties. I mean, again, we don't want to get into a situation in Canada where a man or minister can make penalties against the public. I mean, that is the role of Parliament. How can we be in a situation where a minister can say, off with his head? I mean, that is the kind of thing that they're having to do to hang on to this monopoly power. So there weren't any truck seizures before, and then this minister's order comes out and starts, and all of a sudden the customs starts seizing trucks and levying fines and so on and so forth. If they had the power in law before, they sure weren't using it, not until this minister's order came out, Minister of National Revenue's order came out.
They've seized trucks in the dead of the night. They've harassed farmers in the dead of the night, and the RCMP has assisted them. They seized trucks at well, just about every port from north of Minot all the way to Shelby.
Your appeal is your address to write an appeal letter stating this seizure number that's up in the square here.
Okay. And there was trucks seized last spring, and they were seized at night and hauled in, and were in compound for 3 months, and to this date, some of them trucks are still there and under police seizure.
It was 20 after 5. We had the trucks running outside and warming up, and we heard some commotion outside and seen lights all over the place and flashing lights and everything else. And it wasn't long. There was 2 RCMP and 4 customs officers come barging through the door, never knocked or anything, and walked across the kitchen floor with their muddy boots and presented me with some search warrant and summonses and whatnot.
One of the customs guys stayed in the house the whole time with his video camera. He didn't have his video camera on all the time, but he had it on a lot of the time. I don't know what he thought I was going to do, because I couldn't hardly move. I had a catheter at the time. And if you've ever had a catheter, you'll know how comfy those are. It sure is what you call a cruel world. I don't see where there's a whole lot of justice in this country. You know, when they consider you as in the same category as booze smugglers and dope smugglers, I mean, things are pretty rough. There's a whole big difference between that and it is growing your own grain.
This grain we produced ourselves, and you know, it's a legal commodity, so I don't think we should be put in that category at all. But that seems to be the examples that they're using to put people like Andy in jail and that, you know.
Well, the day started out, the kids had left for school, and luckily our youngest was in kindergarten, so she was gone. But we had the knock on the door, and there was, I think 7 or 8 people, mostly customs and undercover immigration, and they handed Andy a search warrant and said that they were here to search the premises. And so we just kind of sat there in disbelief. We really didn't know what was happening, and they just kind of told us, you know, don't interfere with us or we'll charge you with obstruction, and just sit and be quiet and
don't do this and don't do that, and they were monitoring us. There were people outside and watching and making sure that no one interfered or came in the house. They absolutely let no one in the house at any time throughout the search, and it felt terrible. It felt like we were being violated. It was like just something that couldn't be stopped, that you couldn't stop no matter how much you wanted it to go away. It didn't stop. It was a horrific experience, and it just I never want to go through it again. We were just trying to make a living, and they were convinced that they were going to stop us in any way they saw fit.
When an outfit in Winnipeg can say we can't be honest, and yet they bullshit us that they're telling the truth, we don't believe it. Not now, not ever.
When it comes down, when they come, is that they stay back out of our way. And we're going to show the people. We're going to show the people in Canada, Western Canada, what a farmer does to sell his grain. You live off of us. You don't understand that. It's too complicated for you people. And we've had our fill with you people. And we're taking it into our own hands.
It's with us.
And you document all this stuff because you're going to need it.
We know why you're after me.
No, I have nothing. This is what I received. This is what I received for my documentation from my lawyer.
You're a superintendent, and it's your people that did that. They lied directly to me. They never even turned south. They turned north. They lied to me, and they got my documents. And where am I going to go?
Well, you know, there's like a ring of powerful statism around the country known as the Customs Act, and it allows them to presume that you're guilty, and that's really what's holding the Canadian Wheat Board together. Is this customs regulations whereby they seize your truck, and then you have to sue them in order to get it back. They aren't giving people an opportunity to face off against the Canadian Wheat Board in court. The Wheat Board is in fact hiding behind the Customs Act.
That's in the judgment of the Federal Department of Justice which act they wish to prosecute under, and I'm only a bystander. In my observation, they're prosecuting under the Customs Act for whatever reasons that they have sorted out. So that's a question better put to the Federal Department of Justice, because they're the people who have to uphold the laws of the land, and they decide which act they have best odds, I suppose, of prosecuting under.
Do we have democracy? Or do we have a dictatorship that has taken over our courts? Have the politicians so ordered that the judges and the prosecutors are to do what they are told to do? Or do we have the rule of law to balance what we know as democracy?
You know, when a judge finds a guy guilty on harmony because he indicates in his verdict that there is no law on all three steps, but when he joins them all together and says he can see a harmony there. And that, to me, means that our government only needs one law to cover everything, because if a judge can translate anything into whatever he presumes, what good is law, written law? And also it's very clear that because another judge found another guy on the identical charge, totally innocent.
On May the 17th at approximately 10:30 in the morning, I was acquitted of the charges, and at approximately 11:45, the Minister of Agriculture changed the law. Boom, just brought in an order in the council. How he can do that in a free country, I have absolutely no idea. It shows a total disrespect and disregard for the justice system. Absolutely just like slapping him in the face. It's like a slap in the face to the judge.
Ralph Goodale, who is known for procrastination, instituted a number of changes to the regulations in the Wheat Board Act, 45 minutes after the Sawatsky acquittal. Now here's a man that thinks that he is above the law. In fact, he is the law. He's not concerned about what the law says. He's concerned about, he wants you to be concerned about what he's thinking. So that means we're not under the rule of law, we're under the rule of Ralph Goodale, you know, and that's another word for dictatorship.
It doesn't matter what Mr. Goodale does. He cannot close the loophole to enable the Crown to enforce monopolistic powers in the court, because monopolistic powers are illegal to start with. Therefore, I don't care what he changes, it will fall apart and he will not succeed.
These judges clearly know there's no law, and there wasn't until the day Mr. Goodale put his order in council through, and yet they're still allowing that to go through the courts and finding guys guilty as if there was a written law the day they took it across. And there wasn't. It's just like a 35-mile-an-hour speed limit on the street. When the government lowers it to 25, they can't nail everybody that drove for the last 2 years at 35, can they?
Andy McMecken was convicted of failing to construe the meaning that Parliament intended between the Customs Act and the Canadian Wheat Board Act. And really what he was saying is that they should have known what Parliament meant to do, but they didn't put in writing 50 years ago.
It's not the law that's doing it, it's just the people. That's what's annoying to me. That's what upsets me. More than anything at all.
What is your sentence exactly?
What do you mean?
What have you been sentenced for?
I've legally been sentenced for nothing. There's no sentence here at all. I haven't broken no laws and done nothing illegal, and there's absolutely no evidence of guilt in any of these trials. And yet they have to do it, and I understand why they have to do it, because it isn't me that's broken the laws, it's them. And the reason they had to break the laws is because they've extorted money off of people in this country, and they're a very corrupt government that we have, and if they ever exposed it to the people, they wouldn't be able to exist anymore. So tremendous respect has been shown to me by these inmates in here in Toledo. When we're out walking around for fresh air, they yell out the windows at me. They just say, "Don't give them the tractor, whatever you do," or they'll say, "Don't stop now, you've got it won." Or,
How does that make you feel?
Well, makes you feel like keep on going, you know. And they can't, you know, if they can't do it to all the people, and they can't do it to me alone, you know. So we're being preached to that everything is so great or getting better, when in fact it's only getting better for that elite group that lives off us all. You know, life isn't great for the people of this country, the real people. And the people are the government. As government officials are to do as they're told. When the people say do this, their job to do it. Don't create schemes and pick somebody and make an example of them. We're all just people.
I suspect that the difference between Andy McMecken and many others is that Andy, for whatever reason, Andy felt that he had the courage to stand up to this thing, or that he was going to take the bold step of standing up to this thing. You know, I actually jumped in my car and I drove down to the border on more than one occasion, twice I guess, and I actually watched as these convoys of farmers were going over the border, as they were confronting the Canadian Customs people and the RCMP, and the first time I went and watched this, I think what struck me, or the thing that I saw that I really had never thought of, is the courage that it takes to engage in civil disobedience. This is not an activity for the faint-hearted or for those who are quick to embrace cowardice. You have to have pretty clear convictions in your mind and very clear reasons to view what you're doing as legitimate and desirable. These were men and women who who just who are prepared to go a step beyond what others had.
The day that we have dual marketing and I have the choice between hauling to the wheat board and anywhere else, that will be just fine by me. If they're paying a better price, they'll get every bushel I grow.
I'd like to know how they justify too. Andy's fine was $56,000 that he had done every Western Canadian farmer out of. There was $56,000 in fine, and now they've made private deals apparently with some people, and they've paid them in excess of $300,000, more or less to keep their mouths shut. So how do they justify Andy paying back $56,000? Are they going to pay every farmer back now the share that they have made in private deals? I don't think so. I'm talking to Ben Hootie.
They gave him freight bonuses, they gave him a special deal on a delivery close by, and the more you dig into it, the more complicated it becomes. I heard yesterday, and we have no documentation on this, but they tell me that Clyde Bond, who's the Crown prosecutor, along with some of the wheat board people, conspired with him to do away with a bunch of his ascertained forfeitures too. So instead of $300,000, he may pay $5,000, $6,000.
That story on Ben, that's common knowledge. Like, he sold 4,000 tons to Robin Hood flour mills in Saskatoon for a premium of $57 a ton. So, I mean, I've got no. If I was Ben, I'd do it too. But I think it should be an open book. I think everybody should have that right to do that. You know. But Canadian Wheat Board.
It's the wheat board that says the farmers are supposed to be equal.
Yeah.
And there really is. It's a myth. They're not equal, and they're not treated equal.
At the meeting that I had had with the board, Lauren Hain, Daryl Bushick, Joe Girdner, Lauren Hain especially so, was intended to convince me that the Canadian system works. It works well. In fact, there were times during the meeting that the discussion became very heated, and I was fully expecting him to ask me to leave because we were getting absolutely nowhere. But upon a challenge of myself to them, being it that they were saying the Canadian system works, it works. I said, well, I'm from Missouri, show me. Show me how it works. Because I've got a product that's worth $5 a bushel, FOB our farm. And if you're expecting me to take a price of something substantially less than that into the Canadian system, then obviously it doesn't work. Show me how it can work. And we departed. The following week, we had some people call us from the milling industry requesting some samples. We had sent the samples to them. It wasn't 4 or 5 business days, and in fact, we were offered the dollars that we were.
Selection allowances is what we call them, and that is something that we would pay as a company if the producer has, if we're looking for something particular grade-wise, some characteristics, protein-wise, whatever it may be, and if we deem necessary, we would put on a selection allowance to attract that grain to us. Not something we do every year, but certain years that's something we will do.
I can tell you that I wasn't aware at that point in time that this system even existed. And I know for a fact that hadn't I attended the meetings in Winnipeg, I wouldn't have been put in touch with the right people, and the deals probably wouldn't have happened.
That's corrupt. That's absolutely under the table corruptness, and there should be an investigation into that. But unfortunately, the Canadian Wheat Board is unaccountable to anybody, and any other business that would have been scrutinized, and there would have been things done to rectify that. But that's terrible.
If the wheat board is doing something wrong and giving him an advantage over other farmers,
then I would be concerned about that, because that's not the intent. The intent is to equalize.
When you see $54 a ton being paid as a side bonus, it's not very equal.
Now that Mr. Goodale has asked for our patience, work our way through the process, we had a review panel, the whole thing was analyzed and dissected and scrutinized. They came up with some recommendations that proposed some minor structural changes in the monopoly and to take certain grains out of the monopoly control. It sounds as though Mr. Goodale is going to turn his back on that whole process. Now that's going to break the faith and break the patience of a lot of farmers who thought that the process, the democratic process and the consultative process that he set in motion would work. If he betrays that patience, then I think you're going to see a lot more than 100 farmers exporting their own grain in violation of the Wheat Board's monopoly.
He has to this date ignored the recommendations of the panel. Obviously, we didn't give him the answer that he thought was acceptable, at least to him.
I think they're respectable recommendations. I think the marketing panel came from a wide range of backgrounds and ideology. I think they tried very hard to find a balance. And although from an economic perspective they may not be optimal, I think they tried to put things in an optimal balance in a political kind of way. I think the recommendations can work. They change the board. They make the board fundamentally different in the future than it has been in the past. Is that bad? I guess clearly farmers are saying they want something different.
Well, they recommended that the barley be removed from the monopoly, and some of the specialty grains that we raise here that the Wheat Board is not interested in marketing, that we could market ourselves, that also has been rejected. There was several other recommendations that they put forward that were very well thought out, I felt, and would have improved and were very timely at this time to improve the whole system, and these have all been rejected. And I think this is a catastrophe.
There were about 33 or 34 recommendations that the panel made, the majority of which we as an organization agree with and would like to see the minister implement. But there are 3 recommendations in there, if they were implemented, that they would result in the demise of the Canadian Wheat Board.
It would be political suicide for Goodale to change a Wheat Board, the Wheat Board Act. So if we can change it in the courts, but again, the whole bureaucracy don't want the change because they have to first recoup the $7 billion that has been lost through agriculture because of the mismanagement of the Canadian Wheat Board. And until they recoup that $7 billion, they will maintain the status quo. And that's exactly what they're doing.
I suspect maybe nothing will change here for the prairie farmers, while the farmers in the Prime Minister's riding will be free to trade their grain freely across the border, and Mr. Martin's steamships will still carry on in the Great Lakes carrying our grain, and the Prime Minister's son-in-law will still be involved in the grain trade, and us poor farmers out here in the prairies will still get 50 cents on the dollar for what we grow.
I think we're going to get dual marketing for wheat and barley.
Why do you think that?
Because if he doesn't do it, it will lead to the total demise of the Canadian Wheat Board.
Why so?
Because what the Farmers for Justice will be forced to do is to take the next step. And I submit that the next step will be devastating to the Canadian Wheat Board.
The grain marketing panel report was the be-all and the end-all for a year and a half, and when it finally came to light, there was no action taken on it whatsoever.
As the grain marketing debate continues to evolve, as some farmers continue to disagree very fundamentally with other farmers, I hope that each side, and particularly the extreme sides, will concede at the very least that those other farmers who hold a different opinion from their own are motivated not by evil, but by the same honest desire to do the right thing, which they so generously ascribe to themselves. It's my hope and expectation that we can conclude all the necessary deliberations with respect to these policy proposals that I've described this morning and present a comprehensive package of legislation to the House of Commons later on this fall.
You know, is government supposed to be the great leveler? Is that the purpose of government? And if it is the purpose of government, you know, why do we not have government enforcing the same instruments over such things as automobiles or homes or houses? Or, you know, that's where that philosophy, you know, ultimately leads to. The other thing, that those who view government as the great leveler make an assumption that is really at the root, I think, of their philosophy, and that's that they assume that the amount of wealth is fixed. They assume that the amount of wealth available to farmers in the prairie region is a fixed amount, that it has a ceiling on it. And if that assumption is correct, and many assume it is, then they view these government regulatory agencies or mechanisms or instruments as a way to ensure that everybody gets their equal or fair share. But on the other hand, if we look beyond that and we understand that the amount of wealth available to a particular region of the country, or indeed to the country or to an industry, is not fixed, that you can create wealth, that you can bring in new wealth, then government becomes an impedance to those who are the wealth creators.
I believe, in this case, government has a role to, in every case I should say, government has a role to try to encourage economic activity in their respective jurisdictions. I know from the research that we are getting a premium. Therefore, I say that, in this case, the rights of the group who are the producers under the Canadian Wheat Board jurisdiction are more important than the rights of a very few people who think they're smarter than everybody else, can run across the border and market the grain around the world.
Everywhere in our society we have regulations, and a society that doesn't have regulations is in fact very problematic for small and medium-sized producers and for citizens, as we see in the current situation in Eastern Europe and Russia. It's very problematic when you haven't got a regulatory system. So I guess I'm puzzled by anybody who says, let's be done with the rules and the fittest survive and the biggest will be the fittest. And the biggest, of course, are not us. The biggest are transnational corporate powers.
If you believe in a wheat board system, then you should have that system, but it shouldn't include everyone. It shouldn't include those who do not want to be included. Similar to anybody that buys General Motors vehicles. I mean, just because the majority of Saskatchewan farmers buy GM vehicles, everybody doesn't have to buy one. It's not a question of those people who are, quote, torn. Like, if they're torn that bad, then get off their duff and see where you stand, because you can't have the quote cake and eat it too. You can have the cake in this case and eat it too. Those who want the cake can have it, and those who don't shouldn't have to eat it, because it doesn't taste good to people who believe in freedom.
Well, you know, I always find that argument, the freedom argument, very interesting. You know, that somehow this is a terrible imposition on their freedom. And I say to these farmers, yes, but I guess that's what civilization is all about, is people getting together and agreeing on what things they're going to do collectively and what things they want done individually. When a farmer gets on the road with his truck, he doesn't have a lot of freedom. He's got to stay to the right-hand side. He's probably got to have it safety inspected. He probably has to wear a seatbelt. He requires a license. He's got to abide by the speed limit. Now, I'm sure these same people could build up a huge case of exploitation and deprivation by the state, forcing them to do that. But at the end of the day, absolute freedom and total freedom, where everybody does what they like, is kind of called anarchy. And some people would say that's not freedom.
This isn't about regulation. The wheat board isn't something that says, okay, you got to follow these traffic signals in order to do business. The wheat board says, you can't use the road at all. Only we can use the road. It's not about stop signs. It's about saying that the Wheat Board is the only entity that can export grain. Now, everyone agrees that there's a need for constructive forms of regulation, and that's what the Canadian Grain Commission is for. The Canadian Grain Commission has been around for almost 100 years, 50 years before the Wheat Board was around, and the Wheat Board, or 40 years before the Wheat Board was even thought of.
The Wheat Board is farmers banding together, and it requires a broad social consensus in the farm community that this is a good way to market grain. And at the end of the year, at the end of a lifetime in farming, farmers are going to have more money. Now, if farmers don't believe that, the majority of farmers don't believe that, the system of marketing won't be around very long. They won't be prepared to live with the disciplines that are necessary to make this system work. And in many ways, it's a microcosm of the country. You know, Canada only exists because you get 30 million people who say, hey, this is a good country and we're going to band together and we're going to compromise and act as a nation. And if that social consensus doesn't exist, hey, Canada won't be a nation, nor will the Wheat Board.
The ironic part of this argument is, despite the facts that removing the board will reduce their capitalist value of their product, they still want to do it. So it really is philosophical from their side of the question, because just having that individual right. And you can expand that to this country, I'll tell you, if we continue in this vein, the Wheat Board, and let's say, it would be great misfortune, but let's say that the Wheat Board was taken away, and that the right of the individual was deemed to be more than the right of the masses, or the group that's involved in it. You know, we would really be on a downhill slide here as far as the unity of our country, from social services to Medicare to whatever, because then that individual right runs roughshod over everybody else.
You can't prosecute freedom in a free country. If we're not a free country, then fine, then let's call it not free, and let's call it a socialist regime or a bureaucratic dictatorship or a communist country. Let's call it what it is. Let's not beat around the bush here. And if not, then fine. Then let's uphold the fundamental principles of freedom. And in order to do that, you cannot have the type of legislation that has been allowed to filtrate its way into the system.
What's the loss with a fully open market? The loss from a farmer's point, there's a loss from farmer's point of view. In my view, there's a loss to the prairie economy, a loss to the national economy. From the farmer's point of view, it's the loss of that monopoly and the extra value that's derived from it for farmers. But that extra value also accrues to the local economy, the prairie economy, and it also accrues to the national economy. And as I said, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars a year, every year, a future stream of income foregone in order to satisfy some sort of ideological obsession with individual freedom.
It's nothing to do about wheat and barley. It's freedom and rights. And they're not freedom and rights that we're trying to get. It's ones we've always had. Somebody is just... It's a myth. It's nothing but a myth that we have to sell our grain to the Canadian Wheat Board.
It all boils down to money. The Wheat Board holds billions of dollars, but it isn't the Wheat Board that holds it. It's the Government of Canada that holds it. It's all in the Receiver General of Canada's consolidated account, and they hold the money, and they're not about to let it go. There's $4.5 billion in there, and that's what this is all about, money. And to control that farmer so that they can have that money at all times.
The single most important food staple in the whole wide world is wheat. So we've got, what, 6 billion people in the world today. If they're going to be fed, it's going to be primarily on wheat. Rice is a close second, and then you have maize and so on. Cereal grains, particularly wheat, because it's food, is a strategic commodity in every society. Just like energy. The notion that there will be a free market in food, in a staple like wheat, is an absolute pipe dream, because it's not true hardly anywhere in the world, because it's food. Governments are going to be involved because if they want to make sure that their population gets fed on one hand, and they want to make sure that farmers get enough so that they'll continue to produce. So governments are involved.
Certainly governments are going to take a great deal of interest in what happens with the food supply and what happens with exportation of grain. But taking interest in it and taking total control in it are two different things.
In the final production stages of this film, the Charter Challenge was underway in the Alberta courts. That is, a legal suit brought against the Canadian government claiming that the Canadian Wheat Board is a violation of human rights under the Constitution. This is a complex issue with no easy answers, with differences and convincing arguments on both sides. The outcome of this dispute may radically alter the Canadian prairie economy forever. Now it's up to the Canadian courts to decide.